Okay. I'd like to welcome you to the sixth and final lecture of this year's winter series. Tonight we're going to be hearing from Ron Nelson, who's seen the underbelly, roof, walls, insides, everything of probably more Bishop Hill buildings than even the colonists. He's been working on them for about 30 years now. Does that frighten you?
28, yeah.
28, yeah. He's our Director of Restoration and Preservation, and he's going to talk tonight about Bishop Hill building practices. I give you Ron Nelson.
Thank you. Well, this is going to be a very diverse talk. I've got some slides cranked up here that we're going to look at a little later. One of the things you never really find out in a place like Bishop Hill is how things were actually done. Who did it? Were they capable? Were they not? Oftentimes they were both on the same building. My father always told me that the reason we saw so many good buildings in Bishop Hill was that the bad ones had all fallen down. And I think that's definitely true. I guess when I began working on the Colony Church in 1962, one of the things that bothered me was that it was my job to repair all the windows. And from the way the windows were put together, it was perfectly evident that at least 6 or 7 different people had been building windows for the Colony Church. And so nothing worked. What you thought would fix one window wouldn't fix the next one. How they were put together, how they were mounted, all kinds of interesting problems like that you don't have in a place where there's one carpenter that's doing the finish work on a house and maybe the rest of the carpenters are framing it in and things. So it's evident that a lot of people were working together, as you would expect in Bishop Hill. And they didn't say to Lars, you build windows or something, evidently, because the hospital building was again the same way, built in 1855. A lot of different methods used in the construction. Many years ago, I taped an interview with Emil Eriksson, which those of you who remember Emil can never be played in public, but he talked about, from what he knew as a young boy, who did what. And many people always thought that Lars Soderquist was greatly involved with the buildings, and he was not, according to Emil. He was very much involved in building furniture. Lars Lindbeck seems to be one of the key people, and Abraham Florine. And in one of Lindbeck's letters, he mentions that this building, which was just being finished at the end of the colony, it was such a surprise to him because Florine and he were paid for plastering the colony school, $12, which would be a little higher today, I'm sure. So that kind of approach to things, and we always thought in other areas, and it's one of the things that Carolyn Wilson and I have debated for many years, is that she always said that Bishop Hill allowed people to specialize. I'm not so sure in the building things that that was true. I think that people had a lot more freedom to choose what they wanted to do than we think about. And there is indeed in many accounts of the colony people deciding to work in another department because they didn't like where they were working. And so you don't have this bunch of specialists doing just little things. Lars Soderquist is making furniture, but he probably was doing other things too. I think when Olav Isekson and I began working very hard with the people who had come, because Isekson's thesis was that at least 10 times the percentage of craftsmen were in Bishop Hill that were in the areas that they had left from. In other words, there was 10 times the percentage of skilled people here. But what we found in the Wilson's report in the middle 70s was that these people were not master craftsmen. They were often journeymen, and they were not going to be able to move up. And among these people were Jonas Malmgren, the head colony blacksmith, Lars Soderquist, the cabinet maker, Lars Lindbeck, the builder, and on and on and on. They had come, I think, partly because there was not a place for them to move up to in Swedish society at that time. And Bishop gave them a place to go. And not that these men were extremely talented. They were. Every one of them, I think, was easily be able to be a master or not just a journeyman. But there wasn't room. Jonas Malmgren could not move up in the ironworks at Voxnabruck because the man who was his superior was almost his age. And unless Jonas could depend on a good act of God, why, he was going to be a journeyman until he retired. So that's the way those things work. Also, you have to remember that Swedish society at the time that these people came from was a society where there was a great deal of handicraft done. Farming in Sweden was always marginal, and they depended on other things to make their way. They also depended a great deal on doing as much of their own work as possible. So you have people with a lot of manual skills in Bishopville. And I don't think I don't know, Dan might argue with me, but I guess you can teach even a Swede to lay bricks, can't you, Dan? But I think that was something they were not very familiar with, was the use of brick as a building material. When the statement is always made, oh, the Bishopville people didn't know anything about bricks, that's wrong, because they were making bricks in Hälsingland for 150 years before they came to build their fireplaces and their chimneys in these big log houses. But there's no sense of building a brick house in Hälsingland when you've got all those nice straight pine trees. And also, one of the things that the Swedes found out about bricks was that they seemed like they would make a real nice warm building, but they don't. It takes a foot of masonry to give you the same insulation as an inch of wood. And so if you have an 8-inch timber building built the way they did, where they fitted the logs to each other, there was no chinking, you needed an 8-foot thick masonry wall to give you the same kind of protection. And that's what the Bishopville people found out. And also another thing they found out is that everybody thinks because they came from north that it was colder in Sweden, and it isn't. I think they knew what cold was like when they got to Illinois. In Sweden there's very little wind, especially in the areas Bishopville people come from, heavily forested hills, quite a lot of snow. So these things, their immediate adaptation was to a new climate, and they didn't understand it for very long. And the early buildings also indicate that they didn't understand that they needed to put better foundations under these buildings than they did. Dan, I think the footings on the hotel were, 18 inches below? And they didn't know enough to go below frost on the first part of the hotel. Then they began going below frost on the later 2 additions to the hotel, which has had a lot to do with tearing the building apart. Everything is going in different rates of going down, and will continue to until, I don't know if they're going to pick it up and put a new foundation under it or what they'll do. We also, I want to say to you that they didn't do everything right. I hear all the visitors come to Bishopville, oh, if we could just build like this today. Well, there's a nice flat tin roof under the one on the steeple building that testimony to the fact that they didn't build things right. And they tried to drain it to the north. So the trough was always in the shade of the tower in the wintertime, always froze up, always backed up, leaked from the very beginning. And in 1869, it was such a problem that they finally decided they would just put the roof on the steeple building that's there now. And one of the choices we'll have to be making very shortly is, in about 1993, we will have to put a new roof on the steeple building. And we have to decide what kind of roof we're going to put on now. If we want to go back to a flat roof, we'll have to be looking at the membrane roofs that good years developing, because the tin ones didn't work last time, and there's no reason to believe they will work now. So those are the kind of problems. There are also the Bishopville people's trouble in dealing with timber. See, in Helsingland there were all these uniformly sized trees that made perfect log cabins. And so you just think, well, they come to America and they move in near Red Oak Grove, and we'll just build log cabins. But the trees are 6 and 8 feet through. Chuck Johnson tells about a stump that still existed in Red Oak when Charlie Falk lived on the farm that was 8 foot across at the base, black walnut, and it had been 30 feet to the first limb, and the colonists sold it to Germany for cabinet wood in 1850. So they were shipping it out, but they needed more machinery to deal with the problems here. And that was why in 1847 they bought a shingle mill the first year. They bought an up and down sawmill in 47 also. But in 1850 they had given up on the Edwards River as a source of power. And that was when the steam engine. Everyone thinks of the steam mill as operating a steam mill. But everything is going on at the steam mill. In the inventory of the steam mill in 1861, there's 60-some table legs down there. At the steam mill are the turning lathes, the circular saws that they bought, everything else, because that's where their source of power is. And things are moved from the steam mill away. But there's basically mass production going on at the steam mill, and it's an awful lot of it is carpentry. There was also a steam engine in the blacksmith shop, well, outside the back door of the blacksmith shop, that operated a metal turning lathe and several other things that they had purchased. So they had high-tech machinery, and they had to learn to operate almost all of this because the methods that the Swedes were using were not in any way comparable to what was going on. So basically, they had a whole lot of things to adapt to. They didn't do the very best they might have in many ways. The hotel is a classic example of built-in structural disaster. The steeple building roof was a built-in disaster. But generally, toward the end of the 50s, they were getting much better with their buildings. They were going deep enough with the footings to get below the frost. You see, in Helsingland, there is no pattern to where you build a house. You build the house on top of the granite outcropping because then you don't take up any farmland. So there is no problem with foundations. I mean, solid granite doesn't move much. And so that's what determined where the houses were put. Here, they didn't find any footings to build on, even going down 4 feet. In my backyard, there's more than 4 feet of black dirt, so unless you go down to the clay, you don't get any bearing. Now, I think what we should do is look at these slides, and I think we're going to kill a few myths in Bishopville tonight. And we'll just kind of go through these and interrupt, ask questions. Now, let's see if everything will work in this shape. This is a picture taken looking east from the, I guess that's as good as we're going to be. Looking east from the hotel tower. It's before 1869 because that's when the newer roof was put on the steeple building. But I ask you to look out into the countryside beyond. You see no houses. There's nothing out there yet. People are still probably very much traveling back and forth from Bishopville to farm their little plots of land that they were given in the colony. You also see behind the store a huge barn on what is the corner of the colony woodshed lot now. It's my assumption that that barn was built to be the livery stable for the steeple building when it was going to be opened as a hotel. See all the 3 board fences? And you don't see any tombstones in the cemetery because the cemetery is still far off to your left, there by the above the steeple building. And a lot of little trees. Right here, a Fairbanks Morse scale that was a colony installation used to weigh wagons for barter from people who brought things to the colony store. You also see the picket fence. You know, when I put the picket fence back up around the park, there were a lot of people in town who said they'd never been there. And I showed them this picture, and they still said it hadn't been there. I don't know. This is a picture, I think, in the 1870s, and it's looking west from the steeple building tower toward the Bjorkland Hotel. See the administration building, and then Edla's house, the hotel, and then the little building beyond the hotel was Clara Brolin's photography shop. And she, a lady photographer who was here for a while, was my grandmother's sister, went to Stratford, Iowa, opened a photography shop there, then on to Minnesota after she married a man named Hallman.
Hilbrand. Hilbrand.
Oh, okay, Hilbrand. This is a shot that is taken from down on the Edwards River, and I'll try to orient you. The farthest building to the left is the dairy building. I put this in because I want you to notice all the barns there. And this is Chaser's house, where Arlene Rigg lives now. Over here you have several sheds, and this, I believe, is the house that Harold Nordine lives in. But you see the house where Alvin Gunner lived and the one next to it are not there yet. And there are huge barns west of the dairy building on that lot. And let's see, this building, I believe, is the barn that Arlene has just taken down not very long ago. This is a shot taken by Dr. Benice in about 1895 or 6, and it's looking straight east off the steeple building. The farmhouse out here is Youngstrom's. This is Dave Kenny's house. This is the house that was torn down to build where Funky's live now. This is Wayne Erickson's house. And then I want you to notice all the little sheds and things that are stuck around. And one of the problems we've had here is really determining ages of outbuildings. I believe that each building had a privy and a common shed about 8 by 16, which they stored their fuel in. And that was roughly what existed, along with some barns around town at the end of the colony. But you see, the minute you divide up the colony church, everybody isn't going to keep their coal and cobs in the same place, so everybody has to start building little sheds. And those are the things that everyone remembers. Abel Sandberg told me that there was a whole row of little sheds west of the church, and there were huge apple trees right behind them. And that's why those apple trees are planted there. But the sheds were newer, but the apple trees were colony trees. So, and also you can see the fences here.
You put those apple trees there and they're there now, don't you?
Yeah. This is from the steeple building, looking northeast. Lucille Bergstrom's house, Ole Locke's house in the country where Wayne Schobert lives, the dairy, and this is Steve Carlson's house. This is a colony barn. This is a colony barn. These are Arnquist's corn cribs. He traded and sold corn, people at the store. You notice the ramp is gone off of the back of the blacksmith shop. And one of the things we're thinking about doing is putting back this stair to get access to that second floor and to utilize the space that's there. But an awful lot of these buildings, the other little buildings here, this is Arnquist Salt House. These are buildings that are built later. And we keep trying to want to clutter up Bishopville with a lot of little buildings, but if we're talking about the colony period, I don't think there were that many little buildings. But of course we have so many later houses in town that need to have those little buildings around to be correct.
What do you mean by a salt house?
He was a grocer, and so he stored his salt and his feed down here, and I can remember this building just barely. And I thought we should look at the great controversy that always exists in Bishopville about the flagpole. Here it is up. This flagpole was put up in 1889. It was, I think, the result of a tremendous burst of super patriotism in Bishopville that happened after the centennial in 1876.
Where's that flag now? I helped her there
I don't know
years
where it
ago.
is. This is the Swanson House, and this is looking south out of town. And you see the little bridges and the boardwalks. Bishopville was full of boardwalks, just loaded with them. Now you see this is, again in the 90s, and the house has been painted traditionally with the dark trim and the light siding, which is not the way it was originally. And this is, I think, the Prairie Workshop, if I'm not mistaken.
Where's that one?
That's where Betty Robertson has her shop. You notice that there's an awful lot of young pine trees that have been planted in Bishopville, probably in the 1880s, and these are the Norway spruces that we've been seeing coming down now. Now this little building here on the right is what I suspect was very much like the buildings that were at each major building. And it was largely a fuel storage building originally. You see somebody's put a stovepipe in it now, and they're using it for a summer kitchen. But this kind of structure, we also found the basis of this kind of structure at the Colony Church just off the southwest corner there. And it was impossible to date, but it had just literally rotted right into the ground. The sills were still there, and there were lots of fragments of corn cobs and coal in the ground. And it was roughly the same size, 8 by 16. Let's see, if you lived in this building, everybody in this building went there and got their coal and cobs. But then the day the colony ended, where'd you go get your coal and cobs? And how could you keep your neighbors from using yours if you couldn't lock it up? So you start building little bitty buildings all around.
Is that original picket fence?
Yeah.
You didn't tell them what building it was.
Oh, this is the dairy. And it's, this little building was moved up against the north end. And used as a kind of a summer kitchen by your, let's see, your folks. Didn't they have a little?
No, it was not being used as a summer kitchen at that time.
It was kind of back.
Just sort of a
Back porch?
back porch.
I see.
They lived in the north end of that building, didn't they? Philip? Your parents?
What's the question?
Did your parents live in the north end of that building?
Yes.
North end of the
Yeah.
dairy building, yes.
I remember that.
Now this is, I guess, the main commercial area of Bishopville in about 1900. This is the Red Oak and another part of the Red Oak, and this is Fred Celine's drugstore. And Margaret Jacobson told me a wonderful story. She said Fred Celine was kind of a jokester, and he kind of liked to pull tricks on people. So one time Fred went to Peoria for the weekend, and he came home with a woman. And she didn't go away, and the phone lines were virtually burning up in town. I mean, it was serious. And nobody had asked Fred, and it went on for months, and it was the scandal of Bishopville. And he didn't volunteer any information, and finally somebody asked him. And he said, "Oh, well," he said, "my sister had to go home." And
Was that Fred Hallfest you're talking about?
Fred Celine.
Oh.
And so this building burned down, and I don't know how they managed to save the red oak right next door to it, but it burned completely down. And my dad told me about, he was not very old, and they would be, they set up a bucket brigade to keep the roof of the red oak wet. And they finally got it going so efficiently that they were grabbing the water that came out of the eaves spout and recycling it to put it on the roof again. Now here you can begin to see that the trees are beginning to be a factor in Bishopville. I mean, they're getting some size to them. These are hard maples that are gone. And you also see the street light. And it just looks like a large farm lantern set on top of a post. This is the second set of street lights. And the first set went in 1874. And Raleigh Olson told me that he can remember the man who took care of them. Every night he would put in a certain amount of kerosene, depending on the time of the year. And that meant that when the kerosene was gone, the light went out. So in the winter he put in more kerosene because he lit it earlier. But the trick was they were all supposed to go out around 9 o'clock. And that was how it was done. He didn't go out and blow them out at 9 o'clock. They just went out. And then he restoked them the next day. This is an early shot of the hospital building. And I don't know why this building had the 3-board fence around it instead of the picket fence, which was the common fence in Bishopville. Boardwalks, fences, little shed there to the right. You can see that the railings on the porch are completely gone. They went very early. And the porch we put back on, we copied the newel posts from shadows on the wall there. And it was, we were very lucky because we were able to get, with the right kind of light at the right time of day, be able to get the outline of them. And of course, here's the main street of Bishopville. You can see the later picket fence on the right there with the pointed flat pickets. And then the little building that's now in back of the post office is right here. And the only thing I've been told about that is that it was a tavern, and it was run by a Frenchman named Lefevre. And I don't know anything more than that about it. And I don't ever remember when that building wasn't in back of the post office. So it had gotten moved back pretty early. You see the little building to the right of the steeple there. Again, it's been converted to a summer kitchen with a chimney and windows, but this was the same size creature pretty much as the one at the dairy. And of course the brick sidewalks which went in after 1900. Looking the other way, you'll notice the road covering here is pretty much limited to mud. Now, all of the picket fences are gone, and this is about a 1910 shot because the front of the store is brown, and that seems to have been about when that happened. That was the last color before they took it out and put in the great big pane windows. can see that the hotel tower, the Eagle, is gone. It's looking pretty dilapidated. And I told you the wrong date because, let's see, Grandpa tore that off in 1905. So,
Your dad was a little boy when they tore it.
yeah.
He said Grandpa wouldn't let him come down there because they just had to watch it from home.
And the Colony Church. I think the earliest picture we have of it. It's already been altered. You can see a porch to the west side there. The double doors were, after 1874, they took the outside stair off, and there was an inside stair. See, what we've done in Bishopville is that Grandpa did stuff, and then I went back and redone it, and that's how we keep ourselves employed. This picture was instrumental in the rebuilding of the picket fence around the church. It was just a windfall, and this was given to me by Ruth Bergman. Ruth Erickson. And this is Main Street of Bishopville in winter, and you see the trees coming on. We forget that there were hedge fences on both sides of the road all the way into town. And here's Robert Jacobson on the west side of the Bjorklund Hotel. This picture was a happy occasion because it showed the picket fence. And here's the Jacobson house looking to the northwest. See the Bjorklund Hotel to the left of the house. See a lot of young trees. You also see this structure here, which is in a very, very American grape arbor. Now this building puzzles me. I don't think it is the blacksmith shop. Dan, have you got an opinion?
Sure don't.
It looks too flat roofed. I wonder if it's one of the broomhorn barns that were over by Rich's. Well, anyway, this is a photograph from the Jacobson family. Dick sent this.
You know, one of those boys that passed away now.
Yeah. Okay, here's the other side of the Jacobson house, looking to the southeast, and there you can see the grape arbor on the left. Also, these two windows here were the recessed alcoves on the north side of both the Jacobson and Swanson house had these that could be inserted in them in the wintertime. So in effect, they closed off the porch, and then that wall was just taken away in the summer. So it's a neat thing. Again, the three-board fence, which there were a lot of these around town, and it seems like we get stuck on the picket fence, but I think we've got enough photographs that we can tell you what fencing was everywhere. And here's the Jacobson family. And when I did the paint research on this building for Dick, I found out that the trim was battleship gray and the siding was light blue. And that was the second coat. The colors that are on it now are the first coat put on in 1866. And let's see, here's Margaret and Helen. And let's see, we've got Robert.
What's the date?
I would guess it's 1900, Carl. Let's see, how old would Margaret Jacobson be now? She'd be 100.
I was along when it was our 80th birthday, and I we put on a birthday party for her in church. Our
Okay.
church.
Well, maybe 1890s, Carl, because I think those kids look like they'd be 10, maybe?
colors did they use on their houses?
My house was always painted red, but it's the only one I know of. But also Crispo was red. They liked white because it reflected the best use of the classic revival style architecture, which they chose. You can't think about buildings in Bishop Hill without thinking about Bishop Hill as a utopian society. They adopted a style of architecture that's 30 years out of date when they began building the steeple building. They are doing it because architecture is part of the good life. And they, I think, were enough Jeffersonian Democrats in Bishop Hill that that was one of the things classic revival was taken up by. And so their architecture is also a statement of their belief that this is a place where that is indeed the New Jerusalem. I put this in because this is J.F. Benice's backyard. And it's the way almost all backyards were about 1905 in Bishop Hill.
The original doctor.
Full of little buildings, full of gates. You can see this shed has been changed from a low pitch roof to a steep pitch roof. We have a wonderful shot of Dr. Benice and John Root Jr. standing in front of this gate, which is why we know where it is. Benice is the man who we have to thank for a lot of these photographs. He got very much into photography in the 1890s, and I don't think we have more than a half dozen pictures taken before that in the This is a colony barn. I don't know where it is. Some people said this was in back of Pumper Nelson's house, but I have no way to know.
That's where Hepner's live now, isn't it?
Yeah. But you see, they just use 1x12s like drop siding. Nothing, or I mean like regular siding. And there are no shingles on this building. It has what's called roof boards, which have two little grooves on the edges of the boards and a batten over it. And they just laid them on and put a batten over the crack, and it was a pretty efficient roof. Awful lot of buildings here had those roofs on. All of the buildings at New Salem had those roofs on, but we're too wound up in the fact that we ought to look like Lincoln logs, so we don't put those building roofs back on. I had to put this in. I don't know where it's from. It's, I think, from around here, because it's a nice photograph.
Dr. Benice himself.
This is, I think, the kind of buildings that there were literally dozens of around the area and have just disappeared. It's probably a two-room house. And this is the way people lived when they got to America when you didn't come to Bishop Hill. A lot of people got their picture taken standing by the house. This is a very Swedish-looking house. And again, of a nice photo, so I assume it's from around here, but I have no idea where it was. And I think so many hundreds of these little houses in the outlying areas have just vanished. And then we begin building a little fancier houses. And we always stand next to the house, you know. This is so when you send a picture back to the folks at home, they can see how well you've done in America. And of course, Albert Krenz. This is a great photograph. I mean, 19.
Where's that building?
It's gone. It'd be down where Wayne Yerkeson's big shed is now.
Yeah.
Isn't that the The livery, the barn.
Yeah, livery stable.
Yeah.
Now this again is looking east from the steeple building. And only we catch the front end of the things here. And this was the goof-up slide that we got, Yolanda. It had 3 panels all mixed up, and I thought I would put it in. So generally, that's, I'd like you to look at the features in these pictures and think about everyone's yard had to be fenced because the livestock ran the streets. It wasn't to keep things in. It was to keep livestock out of your yard, that people...
That's the reason they put a fence around the
And
yard.
even as late as the 1880s, the village board of Bishopville was selling the grass in the park to the highest bidder for hay. And everyone, when we were working with the fence, I happily, Len Malmgren was still alive. And I witnessed the best argument I've ever seen in my life. Minnie Chilberg told Len the fence had never been there. And of course he took great delight in going home and getting about 3 pictures of him standing in front of the fence when he was about that high. And just irritated her immensely. Now, I think, you know, we can go on with building practices, but what we had in Bishopville during the colony period is a very efficient organization, very efficient use of buildings. Then it becomes very inefficient. Everybody that's got a room in the steeple building has to have a cob house and a coal house. And we start cluttering up town. And people who remember the big brick remember the long lines of little sheds on both sides of it. They weren't there in the colony period. And they weren't. And so many people who bemoaned their loss were bemoaning something that wasn't really part of what we were doing. But I do think we need to keep the little buildings in town, and that's one of the things we're going to begin stressing. It should be a lot of fun to do this. Now, I can yak on forever, but 50 minutes is long enough. They always used to give us 10 minutes between class. So,
Why haven't you shown the picture of my house?
because they didn't duplicate it.
Get the one with the rail.
Well, we've got this handout. And I direct you to the lower picture, which we were supposed to get a slide of, and it didn't happen. But this is the meat processing complex of Bishopville Colony. And you see the building at the upper left in behind, and that is a barn that is about where Olander's house is now. And it's 40 feet wide and 200 feet long. And they fattened the cattle in that barn on grain. Then the cattle were brought to the building that is the tallest one here, which is the slaughterhouse, and they're killed there. Then they're cut up in the brick building that stands to the right of it. That is the building that stood exactly where O.W. Johnson's house or Rushing's are now. And then the bigger building is the meat storage house.
And that's my house.
That's where my mother lived. And that building is an interesting problem because they salt cured practically everything. And the advent of plastic electrical boxes has been a great help because the electrical boxes will rust out in 2 or 3 years in that house. There's so much salt in the floors and the wood yet that it just eats them alive.
You found that out in my basement.
Yeah. So, any questions?
Were there any smoke houses?
Yes, there were smoke houses. There's some question about whether this was a smokehouse also, Harold. And again, as I started off by telling you this evening, the trouble you have with Bishopville is that we don't really know how the nuts and bolts of things operated here. We know from Mary Malmgren's interviews that when there was planting or harvesting to be done, everyone went to the fields. But we don't know how the rest of it worked every day.
I expected you to have some pictures
Carl?
with a big brick.
During the colony period, was it ever necessary to hire craftsmen or artisans from the surrounding area?
Yes. Lardenbeck mentions in his letter of 1907 that the colony store is built by American masons. So they've hired people to come in. I think that probably went on from 53 to 55, because when you look at the period of building, in 1855 they built the hospital building, the dairy building, Crusoe, the Red House, and I can tell you that Crusoe is a true balloon frame house, which of course everyone, if you read the history books, has never built in America until after the Chicago fire. But they beat them by 15 years.
What do you mean by balloon house?
Well, it's the way the sills are made, that the house does not depend on heavy members anymore to carry it. It's used in the configuration. And balloon framing became extremely popular in Chicago after the Chicago fire because it enabled things to be built quickly. And that was what, and when I found out that Crusoe was a balloon frame house, I couldn't believe it. It has a 2x12 sill instead of an 8x8, which is what all the rest of the house. And my house is built the same year. It's got 8x8 walnut sills. So there's, Ray Pearson always said that they sent all the guys who were either drunk or didn't know how to carpenter out to build Crusoe. I don't know if that was true or not. So, yes?
What did you call the weaving and the spinning and that kind of thing?
The first weaving establishment was a building directly north of the Colony Church. And that was built just as a weaving house, converted in 1849 to the first hospital. And that building is one of the failures that we have had in Bishopville. It's been lost since the Heritage was formed in '62.
Why haven't you got a picture of the baker and brewery building like that?
I wasn't shown all the buildings, Mother.
Was there a building where the present tavern is? Was there another kind of building there?
We don't know of anything else on that block other than the boys' house and the church. And I don't know, depending on how much damage was done to the archaeology when Arnquist's store went up, whether they will ever be able to find it out. See, Arnquist's store is built 11 feet on the street. They missed with the, somebody messed up. And P.L. Johnson's is 11 feet on the street to the south and 15 feet on the street on the west. And so there was a lot of confusion in that block, and I don't know why. And all the other buildings, every building in Bishopville is set perfectly true, except the Colony Church is crooked on the lot. And I'll tell you, I think what happened was that it got started before they got the American surveyor in here in 1847. So it's pretty askew on the lot. Where the west wall of the Bjorklund Hotel and the west wall of the Big Brick were benchmarks in town. They were on the line. And the surveyors say it's amazing how on the line they are when they survey. So, but to finish your question about the weaving, it got moved all around then. And a lot of it was done in the spinning, especially done in the individual rooms. But there was weaving going on the second floor of the blacksmith shop, also broom making being done up there. I think it got moved where there was space.
I have a question. I have read that there was a dye house and 2 dyers.
Mm-hmm.
You have any idea where that was?
That was down by the creek, almost exactly where the house that Susie Dietz lives in. Do you know where? It's the first house on the west side of the road coming into Bishopville. It was back there. It was building that looked an awful lot like the little buildings that I showed you. Helen Berg remembered that building. She said in the Bishopville movie, "Oh, there's a picture of me and the dye house. I'm not a colonist. I'm not that old." If you remember that phrase, and that was that building. Also, there was a sorghum house about where the gas station is. There's some wonderful pictures. But we didn't get those. The Campbells. There's a great picture looking north and east from the Colony Church of a group of camels coming to Bishopville and with a circus. But what's so neat about it is that all those little buildings are in the back of that picture. But it's just fantastic.
Just to show you how old I am, I remember some boardwalks that were still in
You
use
do?
when I was going to school here.
Where were they at, Phil?
Well, one was from the hotel building south, past what was Ida Johnson's orchard, down toward the I forget the name now, but it was on the opposite side of where your grandparents.
Okay. Clear down that far?
Well, I think it went all the way down just about to, I'm trying to think of the old couple that lived across from your grandfather.
Oh, Mary Oaks.
Yeah, Mary Oaks. I think it went down that far. And then there were some others around.
Boy, she made good sugar cookies, Phil.
Your
Better-
dad remembers that boardwalk that went from the church down to the
Yeah.
big bridge.
Yeah, there was that bridge still in existence west of the church going down along.
I'm not sure. Some things I've forgotten that I should remember, and some things I remember that I should have forgotten.
What is it? The memory's the first thing that goes, and I can't remember what's next. Yes.
That hotel with the upper floor that's so big and the mural on the stage or something that you uncovered. What do you have to do with that?
Now, are you thinking of the theater curtain that was in the Baker and Brewery?
No, I mean, taking the wallpaper off the,
I did that in Sheffield, but not here.
That
well,
was
every
there.
time I've been in that building, you go upstairs and there's this huge, it's a hotel, I'm sure, huge, big open room up there with the stage.
Is that a ballroom?
Yeah, there is a ballroom on the third floor of the hotel. We have to, I don't know, Martha, is there any chance you're ever going to get to open the third?
And then
I'm sure the fire marshal is going to have a lot of fun with
we're
her.
going to maintain that mural.
There's not a mural.
No.
What? They have taken the wallpaper off.
Oh, it's in the ladies' waiting room.
Graffiti.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's graffiti up there.
yeah. It was done by Bjorklund's son. It's,
Isn't there painting or design on the walls up there to make that look like it's outside? When you stand inside that ballroom or hotel.
no.
And when you look at it, it seems I've done this sometimes, but it looks like it's like you were standing outside looking at something.
No, the walls are struck off with pencil to make them look like stone blocks up there. But yeah, I'm sure that everyone's fascinated with the ballroom. The fire marshal is also fascinated with the fact that there's one stairway to the third floor, I'm sure.
Well, the kids used to go up and let skate in that ballroom.
Oh, I used to
Roller
skate
skate.
up there, Marilyn Anderson and I.
In traditional days, what was the purpose? I mean, what did they use that building for, really?
The hotel? It was a hotel, and it was very busy. And so that's why they began building the steeple building as a second hotel. But the third floor, as near as we can determine, was probably put on right at the very close of the colony. There's a couple of reasons to base that on. When the colony inventories the hotel in 1861, there are listed a number of fancy chairs in the hallway downstairs. And I think that they aren't done with the third floor when the dissolution comes. Because I know on the stage, Martha, there are the parts of that stage we found, some of them are not even primed. So something went plunk right there. But it was a hotel, and there's many accounts of travelers staying there. It was, there's an account in the Cambridge Chronicle, which is fascinating because it said the food is perfectly good. It's just like the rest of us Americans eat. Anything else? Yes, Ted?
You might mention the well in the, believe it or not, by Ripley.
Oh, yeah, the well that was never dug in the park.
That was spring well.
And so it's a building, I guess itself, only it's covered up. When we were doing the archaeology, we attempted to find the dugout site, which were there, and there is so much water in the park from that well that we were unable to keep the trenches dry to look. And so we tried to pump the well down with the fire truck, and we were able to lower it about 1/4 of an inch. It's that strong a spring. And it just, we're not going to know about the dugouts, I don't think.
That ravine used to go all the way through the park.
Yeah.
That's by my house.
Yeah, there's a tube under it that they built when they filled it in. And it's full of mud puppies and all kinds of stuff in there. Harvey Nardine and I used to go in by Edla's and come out down by the ballpark, Mother. Anything else?
Was the hotel over the steeple building?
Yes. As a matter of fact, there's something that we have never been able to resolve. There's an account that talks about a brick building used as a hotel in 1847. And if that is indeed the case, then the first part of the hotel is the earliest remaining building in Bishopville. But that was uncovered by Lily Setterdahl in a letter she found about a person who visited Bishopville.
Are they here tonight? Saturday?
No. No. I think there's so much more to be done in this town that everybody will be able to keep busy into the next millennium. So, anything else? Good.
That's very good.
Thank you, Carl.
A quick announcement at Bishopville season opening on April the 1st, there will be a lecture at the Steeple Building given by Tandy Lacey, who's an art historian from Springfield. She'll be talking about Bishopville in relation to Illinois crafts and folk art. She'll be there in conjunction with the premiere of our new expanded craft demonstration program. We'll try and have as many of the 8 crafts demonstrators there as we can. There'll be paper making and chair caning, quilting, spinning, Claire, and spinning of woolen flax. There will be weaving. Linda Wren from Andover will be weaving for us. She's bringing her daughter Catherine, who's about 6 years old, who will be weaving too. So it should be a lot of fun. I hope you come and see all new craftspeople and some of our veterans too. Thank you. Thanks.